Hi everyone, it's Nadia and Jake, and the doggies are napping downstairs today. Today we're going to talk about something that just dropped on Prime, that we just got on Prime.
Movie.
No.
It's on the streaming service Mubi.
Oh, let me just start
You
over.
thought I just said movie.
Yeah, I was like, it's a movie. A movie called The Substance.
The Substance,
Yeah.
So this is one we've been wanting to see for a while. It was in our local theater for like a day, and then, we missed it. So people love it. Some people hate it, but I feel like it's getting a strong reaction because it is very seeking a reaction. The movie is definitely of a certain style and tone and substance that is pretty different for a movie getting this many views. It's a body horror film. I mean, there's a lot to go into here. Do you want to start? What did you think of this movie?
One word, grotesque. It's honestly, I think, one of my favorite movies of this year.
Whoa.
But I say that while
I'm
not being
surprised.
able to watch a lot of the scene because it was that disgusting.
Well, you have
But
an
I-
excuse. You're pregnant, You have serious
And
food
I was
aversion.
eating too, and I was like, so I closed my eyes for some of the more grosser scene and let like Jake tell me what was happening, because since we were in our living room, that was kind of perfect for this type of film. It's a little bit over 2 hours, I think like 2 hours 20 minutes long, so it is a little lengthy, but it doesn't feel too lengthy. I think the film is good length for what it's trying to say. It's interesting because you never know what the ending is going to be. It's definitely, like Jake mentioned, it's trying to get a reaction. It is definitely going to get a reaction if you watch it. It's a film that I think is just depicting female objectification in a very artsy way. I'm not talking about from the male gaze. I'm talking about like the way that we see ourselves as well, which could be influenced by the male gaze, or at least in the film, that's what it alludes to. But it's not just restricted to that. It's also like men, how they see themselves as well. What does being young mean? What does personality mean when you're young versus when you're old? For example, do you become wiser as you get older? Do you become more cranky? Do you become more cynical? And it kind of like explores these different subjects. That's really interesting, and the way that it's done, I think it's done really seamlessly. It's almost like it has like a 70s era in a futuristic tone because of the technology that's involved. It's interesting. The set design is very colorful. The clothing choices are very colorful. It feels like it's somewhere in a parallel universe, but not like a sci-fi film. Like, it feels pretty grounded. It also feels very isolating. You do see entertainment industry, but it's like a very small level, quote unquote, Hollywood would look like or could look like versus what it actually is in our reality. I knew because of what you said that it was going to be gross. I didn't understand what that really meant.
Like, it's trying to really rub your face in it, in like the grossness.
Yeah, and it's not like you have to be that gross. You could see that it's an active choice. It's also a little supernatural as well. I should get into that during the spoiler section, but it's a little confusing for me at the end, to be honest with you. I was left with questions about like this invention that we're exploring, but overall I walked away with a message of just kind of like self-hatred, what that looks like, literally physically manifested. And what would you do if you're confronted with yourself? It's interesting because, we always say like, if I could go back in the past, then I would do this different, this different, this different. We all oftentimes forget how cringy, crazy we were at some points of our lives. Could you do those things different, or were you just a different person? What would your past self say about you today? Would they just be disappointed in you, or would they just be like not understanding? It's almost like we shift so much. A lot of times we grow so much throughout the years that we do become different people. I would give this film 9 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm really glad I watched it. I wouldn't have been able to watch this if we watched it in theater, to be honest with you, because I would have probably thrown up. Like, the baby is not like tolerating
I
those
even
kind of
had
things well.
to mute some specific moments just because not looking at the screen wasn't enough. Like, the sound of it was really hard for me.
Yeah, and I honestly...
And it was hard for me too, and I'm not carrying a baby. So.
Well, I told you to like talk me through it in a very,
I know it probably didn't help that I was
sense.
going, making it
Well,
worse.
I actually covered myself in a blanket because I like could see preferably like what was in the screen, and I didn't want to watch that part. Maybe I'll like go after I'm, done being pregnant, and then be like, what were those gross scenes actually like? I saw like the beginning of it, and I sometimes saw the ending of it, and you guided me through what that looks like. So I guess for like how gross it gets, I'm not very credible, seeing how I closed my eyes and relied on Jake to walk me through those things. But everything except for when it got really gross, I watched.
Another hard part is that we're both vegan, so there's a ton of meat imagery, people eating very gross, like scenes of people eating shrimp. There's a scene with Demi Moore and chicken and cooking stuff and egg yolk, and it's just it makes you really disgusted just with like food. And
those parts, I don't think it was necessarily like what they were eating, but it was like how close they were and the chewing factor of it. Like you were literally able to see a person digest their food. And there's something like, you know, when you say, can you please chew with your mouth closed?
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I could say literal in this review, but literally, you know, seeing just the process of bodily fluids, digestion, and things that we don't associate with pleasant when it's in your face like that. I don't go to Jake and I'm like, and then
you
it's
do
like,
sometimes.
Well, you know, they don't need to know that. But it's a gross thing, you know? No one wants to really see that, so.
We're being very vague about the plot details because the plot is extremely simple. Like, once you know what's going on, you generally know what's going to happen.
We'll talk about it in the spoiler
and the progression
section.
of it. My perspective here is that it's basically like a fable. If you're looking for realism, if you're looking for characters with ton of depth, like that's not really the place for this. It's very exaggerated comedy. It's very hammy. I mean, you watch Dennis Quaid playing the most atrocious, over-the-top producer. All of the emotions are heightened and surreal. It really works for the movie, and you have to meet the movie on its level. I've read some negative reviews of the movie that are like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Like, isn't enough depth here with these characters. And I'm like, it's not really about that. It's kind of like just a morality tale. Don't do this, you know? Like, there is some depth to it for sure, and there's stuff you can read into, and they do cover some stuff really well, but it's all very much beating you over the head with a hammer. And I don't usually love when movies do that, but in this case it felt like the point, and that's what made it work so well, is that it was so forceful with its message and so over the top.
I mean, if you're gonna watch it, it's gonna be in your face, whether it's with your message or visually or anything else like that.
It has no apologies. It's not holding anything back. Editing in certain scenes is just so aggressive, cross-cutting between women's butts everywhere in this whole movie, and then chicken being, you know, roasted, or, you know, like all sorts of weird and kind of disarming imagery really works to unnerve you and make you just feel things in your gut, not so much in your head. It's more like a gut reaction that you get out of this movie. And it worked very well. And I think it works great as a comedy, especially like the final act of this movie is just so over the top. We'll get to that later. But I mean, I really enjoyed it. I thought the performances were great. This director, Coralie Fargiat, I think that's her name. She's French. And
what did you think about the performance of the actresses?
I thought the performances were great.
Yeah. So we had Demi Moore.
I mean, a very revealing performance just because there's so much nudity. There's a lot of like just focus on bodies and
Demi Moore, and then also
Margaret Qualley and Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid. It did overstay its welcome just a little bit. I think that it needed a little more, I don't want to say reality in the movie, but I was seeking for a little bit more of unexpected stuff to happen. A few more plot beats within there, because it is 2 hours and 20 minutes, more or less. Once you get into like where the story's going, you're just kind of like, all right, let's see the extremes, you know, let's take us there.
You don't think it took us there?
No, it definitely took us there, but I thought it took its time a little bit, and I was just getting to a point where I'm like, yeah, all right, I get the point. Let's move on. You know, personally, I thought it could have been a little shorter, but you know, that's a very small complaint, criticism. I really liked it. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite of the year. I'd give it like a 7 or 8 out of 10.
I couldn't disagree with you more, which is ironic because usually I have that opinion about a movie could be shorter, but this one I thought it was a perfect length actually, and I wouldn't cut anything out of it. So
it's very good.
So let's talk in the spoiler section about what is good.
Yeah, 3, 2, 1, spoilers.
All right, so talking about body imagery, I thought it was really funny how it's mostly focused on butts. Yeah, like the perkiness of butt, and then, you know, people joke, especially with women, like it's gonna, you know, get to the floor or whatever else, and it's just butt heavy, like younger. So it, you know, the movie, if you've seen it, is Elizabeth, and she does like she's like a workout celebrity, a trainer celebrity,
which already it's such an anachronistic unrealistic. Like the idea that there's this big celebrity and she's just known for doing these workout videos that are very like sexualized. Like it's very 80s and
yeah, exactly. But then she is getting old, at least too old for the industry, as Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid, states. She really is into her career so much that she is willing to she's coping with the changes of something that she can't control, aging. And I think especially with women, it's very common because I think men stereotypically are told they're hotter as they age, whereas women are like used goods, judged by fertility, all those things as they age, right? So those things are very grounded in realism. But you know, then it kind of becomes a little bit more sci-fi related, where there's this substance that you can duplicate yourself. What I really found interesting about this substance is, you know, it gives you food packages, everything else, but it just seems so free and so experimental.
Right. That was something we were asking, like, what's the cost of this? Like, ultimately, there's like, what does this company get out of this? But you never really know because it's like a fable. It's just
it is, and you can assume it's more experimental right now and seeing what happens.
Yeah,
there's a person that they can call on the phone to talk about everything they're going through, and then that person's really just kind of like bleak with their responses.
It's like a modern day like fable of like a wizard or a genie being like, hey, you can be young, but you have to be young for 7 days and your normal self for 7 days. You have to keep the balance, you know?
There's no negotiation for it.
And like then with the body horror elements, like what if we just brought this more into like a modern setting with a feminist twist and more of the focusing on the body elements and how that would work, you know?
Yeah. So when she goes and injects herself with the substance and she duplicates herself into a younger version of her, which she calls Sue, like something that's confounding for me that I never got the answer to is, you know, they're supposed to be one and the same. And that's the kind of like the repetitive message, but they're so different. And it seems like two different people. And that's where I was talking earlier about like, maybe you change so much throughout life that like you are literally a different person. Or what would your younger self and your current self say if you were to, not that this happens in the film, but go back in time and meet your younger self and they fully understand who you are today? Like they have the memory of everything they've gone through. Would they like be proud of you? Would they hate you? In this case, Sue doesn't really seem to understand, even though she remembers and she is Elizabeth. She doesn't seem to understand her older version, and Elizabeth seems to really mock and hate some of the personality and everything else. Like, so it's interesting that Elizabeth really admires Sue for her beauty, for her energy, but she really hates Sue for her lack of responsibility in a lot of ways. So for example, Sue misuses a substance a lot that cost Elizabeth her physical beauty as she was whenever she was in her 40s or 50s. I think it's portrayed. And so there's like a lack of responsibility there. Such a big misunderstanding within each other that it seems sometimes almost impossible to have such level of misunderstanding.
That's something I had an issue with, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I guess when you put it to like, this is like a fable, this is a fantasy, like let's just imagine, let's throw out psychology out of the window, but also it's trying to deal with psychology, and it does deal in very interesting ways, like when Demi Moore is going on that date and she keeps like changing her appearance and comparing herself to Sue and all that. That was a very good scene. In terms of their personalities being so different and not really because we kept asking like, do they remember what they do in each other's body? They do. They definitely do. Their personalities are so different that it makes you wonder what else is really going on, because you do think that, I kind of wish that maybe it had a bit more of a ramp up to that, because it felt like immediately when they switched bodies, they like hate each other. Wouldn't they kind of know in a sense that they're the same, like they have to, I don't know, I just felt like she just like threw out the rules way too fast.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a message there about just self-hatred. In the sense that like Sue needs Elizabeth to live, which eventually goes out the window as well. They're both very impulsive, by the way. Elizabeth hates Sue's personality, lack of responsibility, but she loves Sue physically. Love-hate relationship where Sue only wants to keep Elizabeth around as a substance for her to live and have her life. Elizabeth can not let go of Sue even though she tries to murder her because of her physical beauty, because of everything that she's accomplished. Because of her physical beauty, she's able to kind of vicariously live through Sue all over again. Even when she sees that Sue is being really irresponsible with her Elizabethan self, she still struggles to terminate it. It's so interesting at the end how they both become monsters. Like, a lot of things doesn't make sense if you look at it very logically. Like, Elizabeth doesn't really need to rely on Sue, but she knows that Sue is harming Elizabeth, yet she struggles to terminate her. Yet Sue knows that she needs Elizabeth to keep her alive, to be able to be Sue. And then she murders her in the most gruesome way. And this is where the supernatural aspect comes in. Like, dude, the kick. And Elizabeth, like, having all of that physical...
I just think it's...
Physical, like...
It's just the over-the-top comedy. Like, it's clear... I think there's people who aren't talking about this like it's a comedy, but it was so funny.
It was very funny,
It was very funny, especially, like, that fight scene. It's gross, but it's also funny. So it's, like, that unique reaction where you're laughing, but you're also uncomfortable, which I love. Can we talk about that, the ending, the monster, like, the final form? So impressive and so goofy.
Well, that was my favorite scene.
And then it just ends in that total bloodbath. Her arm falls off and it's just so silly and so gross. I don't know. I really love a movie when it ends with no fucks to give.
It's interesting in the scene where she is a monster, but she doesn't see herself that way as much because she's so disoriented and having like such dysmorphia about her own image that she can paste herself with an image where she thinks she's beautiful, and she automatically assumes that people are also going to see her that way because she wants that so bad. People see her as she becomes a monster in a very physical sense, but also probably personality sense, seeing how she killed part of herself and she was willing to duplicate herself again into something more. She didn't know it was going to be grotesque, but like hope that she was going to like be able to duplicate her duplicate self in order to survive. That she physically and mentally and just psychologically morphs into a monster. There are women who scream at her, but a lot of men start to like shoot her and cut her head and all those things. And
shoot her!
And I think it's just like interesting, the choices of almost like a society, like let's throw stone. I feel like that's where the movie is giving a bigger message about beauty and what do we think about beauty. And you know, it made me really wonder about when we see cartoons like Disney shows and other things, like Snow White is hated for her beauty and then Snow White's mom pretends to be a witch, you know, goodness looks like versus what bad looks like. I felt like that message was in there in this scene. Her personality was always that way as Sue because she always became selfish and she always wanted to put her career first at the expense of Elizabeth. Not that they know about Elizabeth, but she was always like goal oriented and all that stuff. But as soon as her physical look is not what societal standards should be, then all of a sudden they recognize her as a monster. I also felt that the very, very last scene where she melts into her star, sad, but also interesting with the fact that like Elizabeth probably has a lot of money. I was talking to Jake about this. I'm like, if I had so many millions of dollars and I needed to retire for a fair or unfair reason, I feel like I would just retire and do other things as well. I mean, it's easy for me to say that now. I know that, but you know, the extremes that we go to be able to live up to a legacy or expectation that people set on us or we set on ourselves, I think that was depicted. Very, very in your face message for sure. I honestly highly recommend it.
Yeah, I recommend it too.
All right. Well, let us know what you thought if you watched it, and let us know what you're watching right now.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.
Talk to you later. Bye.